On the planet Viridian, the ancient city of Dangruse stood as a testament to the power and beauty of the alien civilizations that once called it home. The towering spires of crystal and metal shimmered in the light of the distant stars, casting long shadows over the plaza, where diplomats and representatives from all over the galaxy gathered. Today was to be a day of peace, a day that could change the course of history. After years of war between the Zalorians, a fierce and proud species, and several other galactic civilizations, the leaders had come together to sign a peace treaty. At the center of the negotiations stood Queen Xylaris, the ruler of the Zalorians. Tall and regal, she was a symbol of strength for her people. Her dark, opalescent skin gleamed in the light, and her piercing yellow eyes glowed with intelligence and determination. But the queen was not alone in this momentous occasion. Surrounding her were her elite guards, the Zalorian Sentinels, tough, disciplined warriors known across the galaxy for their loyalty and battle prowess. They stood in formation, a wall of muscle and weapons, prepared to protect their queen at any cost. Among the others gathered in the Grand Hall was Sergeant Jack Monroe, a human soldier. He had been sent as part of the human delegation, not to lead but to assist in ensuring the safety of the proceedings. He was tall for a human, with short-cropped brown hair and a weathered face that told the story of many battles. Though the queen was not his responsibility, he was tasked with helping secure her safety during the delicate peace talks. As the representatives took their seats at the long, shining table, Jack felt the weight of the situation. The room was filled with the tension of years of warfare, and the threat of sabotage was always in the air. He couldn't help but wonder if they were truly on the verge of peace, or if this was simply another fleeting moment of hope before war broke out again. The delegates greeted each other, exchanging pleasantries, but it was clear that many were wary, especially the Zalorians. Despite the intent to end the war, the air was thick with distrust. Jack stood at the back of the room, scanning for any signs of danger. He was used to the quiet before a storm. He had been in many peace talks before, but this felt different. Something was about to happen. Then, it came. A loud bang echoed through the chamber, shaking the walls. Jack's instincts kicked in immediately. He rushed toward the sound, scanning the room for the source of the disturbance. The Queen's guards, ever vigilant, sprang into action, forming a protective circle around Queen Xylaris. But it wasn't enough. Another explosion rattled the building, followed by a series of sharp, staccato sounds. Jack's eyes widened. The blast had come from the direction of the rear entrance. The rebel faction, a group of radical Zalorians who opposed the Queen's rule and the peace negotiations, had infiltrated the hall. A voice echoed through the comm system. The Queen must be captured. No one escapes. Chaos erupted. Delegates scrambled for cover. The Zalorian Sentinels leaped into action, and Jack saw the once confident guards now scrambling. There was no sense of organization. There was only the sound of panic as the Queen's own protectors began to fall back. Queen Xylaris stood frozen for a moment, her eyes flashing with anger. Her people were abandoning her in the moment she needed them most. The Sentinels, once the pride of the Zalorians, had retreated, their faces filled with fear. They had left her vulnerable. Jack's heart raced. He had been assigned to assist, but never to be at the front lines. His role was small in the grand scheme of things, but in that moment, he knew he had to act. The Queen was in danger. As a soldier, it was his duty to protect, no matter the cost, without hesitation. He dashed across the room, finding himself at the Queen's side. "Your Majesty," he said in a calm voice, though his heart was pounding. "We need to move now." The Queen's golden eyes turned to him, a mixture of surprise and anger in them. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, another explosion rattled the building. This time, the sound was closer. Debris fell from the ceiling, and a section of the wall cracked open, sending dust and smoke filling the air. Jack grabbed her arm. "We don't have time for this. You need to come with me." Xylaris shook off his grip, her regal demeanor still intact despite the danger surrounding them. "You're human. Why are you here? What can you possibly do to help me?" Jack didn't hesitate. "I may not be your people, but I know how to fight. If you want to survive, you listen to me." For a moment, Xylurus hesitated. The thought of trusting a human, of letting someone so beneath her protect her, felt wrong. But in that instant, she realized that her guards, her most loyal soldiers, had fled. There was no other option. With a sharp breath, she nodded. Lead the way. Jack immediately began guiding her toward the back exit. The building was crumbling around them. They had to move quickly. As they reached the corridor, Jack kept one hand on his weapon and the other on the Queen's arm, guiding her through the narrow passageways. The sounds of battle were all around them: screams, weapons firing, the heavy footsteps of alien soldiers pursuing. They could hear the rebel faction getting closer, shouting orders, preparing to hunt down their target. Xylurus glanced at Jack, still wary but beginning to recognize something in him: resilience, a bravery that she hadn't expected. You're unlike any human I've met before, she said, her voice steady despite the danger. Most humans would run. But you. Jack didn't answer. He was focused on getting them both to safety. They turned a corner and found themselves in a small maintenance room, away from the chaos for a moment. Where are we going? Xylurus asked, her voice softer now. She was beginning to see Jack in a new light, but she still didn't fully understand. Why had he stayed? Why had he not abandoned her like her own guards? We need to get to the lower levels, Jack explained, scanning the room for anything useful. It's the only way out. There's a transport pad down there, but we'll need to move fast. Stay close, Xylurus nodded. She could sense the urgency in his words, and for the first time since the chaos began, she felt a flicker of hope. The Queen and the human soldier were now bound by more than the simple task of survival. They were two beings from different worlds, but in that moment, they had one shared goal: to make it out alive. But even as Jack prepared to lead Xylurus deeper into the heart of the building, they could hear the rebel forces closing in. The real fight was just beginning, and neither of them knew what would come next. The narrow corridors of the Janrai Palace were filled with dust and echoes. The sounds of explosions and gunfire were distant now, but they were never far from the back of Jack's mind. He moved quickly, his boots echoing against the stone floors, the weight of the Queen's safety in his hands. He had always been trained to protect, to act under pressure, but this was different. He wasn't just protecting anyone. He was guarding the life of an alien queen, one who had been on the opposite side of the galaxy's fiercest battles. Beside him, Queen Xylurus walked with a dignified, though cautious, step. Her tall frame moved gracefully, despite the chaos around them. Her eyes scanned the halls, looking for any sign of danger, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. She had been in the midst of one of the most important peace talks in galactic history, only to have it torn apart in seconds. Her elite guards had fled. They were meant to protect her, but they had left her vulnerable, running when the threat became real. Jack glanced over at her. She wasn't the same proud and commanding figure he had first seen in the negotiation room. There was a crack in her armor now, a crack he hadn't expected. Keep moving, Jack urged. His voice low but firm. Xylurus nodded, her golden eyes flickering with a mix of surprise and skepticism. She had been told all her life that humans were weak, that they were no match for the strength and power of her people. Yet here was one, standing beside her, protecting her when her own people had abandoned her. She didn't know whether to trust him, but in this moment, she had no choice. The narrow passage they were in twisted through the depths of the palace. Ancient carvings lined the walls, telling stories of wars fought and lost, of empires rising and falling. These halls were silent witnesses to a history long forgotten, now overshadowed by the present danger. You've been quiet, Jack said, glancing at her again. What are you thinking? Xylurus hesitated, her gaze shifting between Jack and the corridor ahead. She couldn't afford to appear weak, not even now, but something in Jack's demeanor made her feel different, safe, almost. I'm thinking, she began slowly, that I've misjudged humans. Jack's brow furrowed slightly. Misjudged us? Xylurus nodded. I've always heard that you are a weak species, that you fight wars, but that you can't stand against the might of others. Yet here you are, saving my life. She shook her head, disbelief still evident in her voice. I didn't expect this. Jack's expression softened. We're not all warriors, but we know how to survive. Maybe that's what makes us dangerous." The alien queen turned to him, studying him with a new intensity. There was something in Jack's words, a truth she hadn't wanted to accept before. Her people had been at war with so many others for centuries, and they had looked down on humanity as just another species to conquer. But here she was, standing beside one, relying on him for her very life. She had always thought that strength came only from power, from physical might. But now, as she looked at Jack, she wondered if maybe there was more to strength than just brute force. They rounded another corner and came to a set of heavy metal doors. Jack pressed his hand to a small console beside it, a series of numbers flashing on the screen as he entered a security code. Xylers stayed close, her attention still split between the door and the hallway behind them. The distant sounds of pursuit had stopped, but she knew it wouldn't last long. The rebels would be close, and they wouldn't stop until she was captured. "You said there's a transport pad?" Xylers asked. Jack nodded, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Yeah, it's in the lower levels. From there, we can get off the planet and get to the nearest neutral space station. But we need to move fast." The door beeped, a green light flashing above it as it slid open. Jack stepped aside and gestured for Xylers to enter. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the hallway once more. Despite the urgency, part of her didn't want to leave. "Not yet." Xylers entered the small room. It was dimly lit and filled with dusty control panels. The air smelled stale, as if the place had been forgotten by everyone. She couldn't help but wonder how many others had passed through these halls. How many soldiers had died to protect the palace, and now here she was, relying on a human to keep her safe. Jack entered the room after her and quickly began working at the controls. "Stay by the door," he instructed. "If anyone comes, we need to move fast." Xylers nodded, standing near the back wall, her posture straight. Her mind raced as she considered everything that had happened. The rebels had attacked so suddenly, and her own guards had run. Her people, the Zolorians, were supposed to be mighty warriors, the fiercest in the galaxy. But they had left her. The thought stung, and for the first time in her life, she questioned the loyalty of her own soldiers. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Jack paused for a moment, then shrugged. "It's my job. I'm a soldier, and soldiers don't run." She frowned. "But you knew the risk. You knew that if you stayed, you could die." He didn't answer immediately. He just kept working on the controls, trying to get the transport systems online. Finally, after a long moment of silence, he looked at her. "We all die someday. I'd rather go down fighting for something I believe in than running away." Xylers met his gaze, surprised by the sincerity in his words. She had never thought about it like that. For her people, strength was measured by how many battles one won and how many enemies one could defeat. But Jack wasn't just talking about surviving. He was talking about standing for something greater. The transport pad was ready. Jack motioned for Xylers to follow him, and they exited the small room, quickly making their way to a larger chamber at the heart of the palace. The walls here were decorated with glowing symbols, marking it as a place of great importance. But there was no time for admiration. As they reached the transport pad, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them. Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled Xylers onto the platform and activated the controls. The pad hummed to life, and the room filled with the sound of energy being channeled. Xylers looked around at the humming machines. "Where are we going?" "Just hold on," Jack said, a faint smile on his face. "We're going to the nearest neutral station. It's not far." Just as the transport pad began to lift off the ground, a sudden crash reverberated through the room. The doors to the chamber exploded open, and a group of rebels charged in, weapons raised. "Get down," Jack shouted, pushing Xylers to the ground as blaster fire erupted around them. The transport pad shot upward with incredible speed, narrowly avoiding the rebel gunfire. The world outside blurred as the two of them soared through the air, moving faster than they had ever expected. Xylers lay flat on the pad, her heart racing. She was safe for now, but as she turned to look at the human beside her, she saw something that she hadn't expected. A quiet confidence, a courage that shone through in the darkest of moments, and for the first time in her life, she realized something profound. Not all strength came from power, from physical might. Some of it came from the willingness to stand tall when the world was falling apart. Jack Monroe, the human soldier, had shown her that. The transport pad hummed steadily as it soared through the dark sky above Janrai, the ancient capital of the Zalorian Empire. Below them, the sprawling city was nothing more than a blur of lights and shadows. Jack glanced out of the small viewport, his mind still racing. They had escaped barely. The rebels had come close to capturing them, but now they were flying to safety, at least for the moment, beside him. Queen Xylurus remained silent, her eyes fixed ahead, but Jack could feel the tension in her posture. She was no longer the proud and unshakable leader of her people. The events of the last few hours had shaken her deeply. Her guards had abandoned her, the peace talks had failed, and now she was fleeing with a human soldier, a species she had once looked down upon. Jack turned his attention to her. She had been quiet since they escaped the palace, her usual confidence replaced by an air of uncertainty. It was clear that she was trying to process everything that had happened, just as he was. But Jack had seen this before. He had worked with diplomats and leaders from many species, and he knew the weight of leadership could be overwhelming. "You okay?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. Xylurus didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back against the side of the transport pad, her golden eyes gazing out into the void of space. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than usual. "I don't understand it, Jack. My own people. They left me. My guards, the ones who swore to protect me, they ran. Why? What kind of leader am I if I can't even keep my own people loyal?" Jack's eyes softened with understanding. He had seen leaders doubt themselves before, but this was different. Xylurus wasn't just a queen, she was someone who had spent her entire life preparing for this role, training to be the unshakable symbol of power for her people. But now, her confidence had been shattered. Jack knew that the strength she had always relied on was no longer enough to carry her through. "You're a leader, Xylurus," he said, his tone steady. "You've been leading your people for years, and you've done more for them than most could even imagine. But even the strongest leaders can't control everything. Sometimes people fail, sometimes they run. But that doesn't mean you're weak." Xylurus turned to look at him, her gaze searching his face. "And you're just a soldier. Why are you helping me? You're not one of my people. You could have left, too. You could have gone home." Jack shook his head. "Maybe I could have, but that's not who I am. I don't just run when things get tough. I stay and fight, even if I'm the only one left." Xylurus frowned, still unsure. "But you're human. You're nothing like my people. You don't have the same strength. You don't have the same power." Jack smiled slightly. Strength doesn't always come from size or power. Sometimes it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was clear that Xylurus was still grappling with the events that had unfolded. She was a queen, a powerful figure, but now she was alone. And Jack, a human soldier, was the only one who had stayed by her side. Finally, Xylurus spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Why didn't you leave, Jack? Why didn't you run like the others?" Jack's expression softened. "Like I said, it's not in me to run. But there's more to it than that. I've seen a lot of things in my life, Xylurus. People, worlds, wars. But I've learned one thing. Sometimes, the most important thing is standing by the people who need you, no matter what species they are." Xylurus studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. For the first time, she saw him not as a human soldier, but as something more, a person who cared. Someone willing to put their own life on the line for a cause greater than themselves. It was something she hadn't expected from a human, a species she had long thought of as insignificant. She exhaled slowly, her eyes softening. "I never thought a human could teach me something," she said quietly. Jack chuckled. "Yeah, we're not always what you might expect." There was a brief pause, and then Xylurus spoke again, her voice more steady this time. "I've been so focused on what I've lost, on the betrayal of my people, that I haven't stopped to think about what I still have. I still have a chance." A chance to make things right, to save my people. And you've helped me see that. Jack's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was a genuine connection between them. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. Xylurus had learned something about humanity, and Jack had learned something about himself, too. The bond between them had formed, not out of necessity, but out of mutual respect. Before Jack could speak again, the transport pad jolted, and the sound of a distress signal cut through the air. Warning. Rebel forces detected. The voice echoed through the transport, and Jack's eyes widened. They were not alone. They found us, he said, moving quickly to the control panel. His fingers flew over the buttons as he tried to assess the situation. Xylurus stood up, her body tense. How long do we have? Not long, Jack replied. They're getting closer, and this ship isn't built for a fight. Xylurus glanced at the viewport, where a small fleet of rebel ships appeared, closing in on them. The sight of them made her stomach tighten. These were the same rebels who had attacked her during the peace talks, the same ones who wanted to see her fall. And now, they were coming for her again. We need to get to the nearest station, Jack said, more to himself than to Xylurus. He quickly began rerouting the ship's course, hoping to find a way to evade the rebel fleet. But it was no use. The rebel ships were too fast, too determined. The chase was inevitable. Xylurus's voice broke through the tension. We'll fight back, won't we? Jack hesitated. There's not much we can do with the equipment we have. But I'll do my best. Stay here. Xylurus shook her head, her eyes flashing with a renewed sense of purpose. No, if I am to lead my people, I cannot run. I will fight. We'll fight together. Jack looked at her, surprised by the change in her. He had seen her as a ruler, powerful but distant. Now, she was someone willing to face the consequences of her actions. Someone who understood the value of standing tall, even when the odds were against her. All right, Jack said with a nod. Together, then, he pulled a few levers, bringing the ship into a sharper turn as they approached the rebel fleet. Xylurus stood beside him, ready for whatever came next. She had no intention of running anymore. She would face the rebels head-on, with the only ally she had left at her side. As the rebel ships grew closer, Jack's voice was steady. You ready? Xylurus nodded. I'm ready. And so, in the face of overwhelming odds, with no other choice but to stand and fight, they prepared for the final confrontation. The Queen and the human soldier, two very different beings, united by a common cause. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The rebel ships were closing in fast. They moved like shadows in the vastness of space, sleek and fast, determined to bring down the transport pad that held Queen Xylurus and her only protector, Jack Monroe. The small transport was no match for the rebel fleet. But Jack wasn't about to surrender without a fight. He wasn't the kind of man who ran, especially not now, with Xylurus standing beside him. Jack's hands gripped the controls tightly, his brow furrowed with concentration. He had been in tough spots before, but this was different. He wasn't just trying to survive. Now, he had something more to fight for. The Queen, the galaxy's fragile peace, and his own sense of honor were all at stake. Beside him, Queen Xylurus stood tall and composed. Her golden eyes reflected the tension of the moment, but she had an inner calm that Jack admired. She was no longer just a queen, separated from him by her position. She was now someone who stood with him, ready to face whatever came next. The rebel fleet is almost upon us, Jack muttered, his voice calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. We won't outrun them, but we can fight back. Xylurus stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she gazed out of the viewport. We're not running, she said, her voice steady and filled with resolve. We fight. If I must die, I will not do so in fear. I will face my enemies with honor. Jack looked at her, a mixture of respect and admiration in his eyes. She had always been a leader, but now he saw something else. She had become a warrior, and that warrior spirit was what they would need to survive this fight. All right, Jack said, his hands moving over the controls with practiced precision. We'll fight together. I've got the weapons, you've got your powers. We'll make them regret ever coming after us. Xylurus nodded firmly. Let them come, as the rebel ships grew closer. Jack adjusted their course to take them toward the asteroid field just ahead. The field was dense, filled with jagged rocks and debris, a perfect hiding place for those who knew how to navigate it. Jack knew that the rebel ships wouldn't follow them into the asteroid field. They would be too cautious, too afraid of colliding with the rocks. This was their chance. We'll lose them in the field, Jack said, his voice low. But we'll need to make a stand. They'll follow us in, and when they do, we'll hit them hard. Xylurus stood at his side, her eyes locked on the stars outside. She had never seen a human so determined, so willing to sacrifice everything for a cause. He was no longer just the soldier assigned to protect her. He was someone she could trust, someone she could fight alongside. The transport plunged into the asteroid field, the ships around them moving in tight formation, trying to corner their prey. Jack's hands danced over the controls, guiding the transport through the narrow gaps between massive rocks. It was a risky move, but Jack was skilled, and the transport, while small, was agile. Behind them, the rebel ships hesitated. They couldn't afford to get too close to the asteroids, but they were determined. The Queen would not escape them. They moved cautiously, but their determination made them reckless. That's it, Jack muttered. Let them get closer. Xylurus glanced at him, a question in her eyes. What are you planning? Jack's lips curled into a grin, though his eyes remained focused on the controls. We've got the advantage here. I know these kinds of ships. We're going to make them think we're trying to escape, and then, when they get too close, we'll hit them where it hurts. Xylurus stepped closer, her gaze narrowing as she understood his plan. You're going to surprise them. Exactly, Jack said. We lure them in, then we attack when they're too close to react. The transport shuddered as a rebel ship fired at them. The blast narrowly missed, exploding against an asteroid just to their right. Jack grimaced but kept his cool. He quickly veered the transport to the left, ducking behind a large rock formation to evade the next round of fire. The rebel fleet was getting closer now. Jack could hear their weapons charging, ready to strike. He had to time this perfectly. Now, Jack shouted, slamming a button to activate the weapons systems. The transport's hidden weapons came to life, sending out a burst of blaster fire that hit one of the rebel ships dead on. The ship's shields flickered, and for a moment, Jack thought they might have scored a kill. But the rebel ship was still alive, though severely damaged. Xylurus's voice was steady as she prepared to assist. I'll hold them off, she said. With a fierce concentration, she raised her hands, her eyes glowing faintly. Energy surged through her, and she sent out a wave of force toward the nearest rebel ship. The ship jerked violently, its course changing as it lost control for a moment. It was enough to throw it off balance, forcing it to drift away from the others. The remaining rebel ships fired again, but Jack expertly maneuvered the transport, dodging the blast with the skill of a seasoned pilot. He shot back at them with increasing intensity, using every bit of the transport's firepower to keep the rebels at bay. Xylurus was not done yet. She focused on another ship, her eyes narrowing with determination. She reached out again, calling upon her powers. The energy she commanded surged, and with a single, focused wave, the rebel ship exploded, sending debris scattering into space. The remaining ships hesitated, unsure of what to do next. We've got them off balance, Jack said, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and relief. Now, we finished this. The rebel fleet had lost one of their ships, and the others were damaged, scattered, and unsure. Jack could sense the shift in their tactics. They were no longer just chasing. They were afraid, and for the first time in the battle, they seemed unsure of themselves. Jack pushed the transport to its limits, guiding it through the asteroid field with quick, sharp movements. He took advantage of every rock, every crevice in the field, to throw off their pursuers. One by one, the rebel ships fell behind. Their attacks were weaker, more disorganized. Xylurus stood beside Jack, her body still crackling with the energy of her powers. She had done more than she had ever thought possible in a battle like this, but she wasn't done yet. She had stood in the face of overwhelming odds before, and today, with Jack by her side, she would prove that she was no mere ruler, she was a fighter. "We've done it," Jack said, his voice full of triumph. "They're retreating." Xylurus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It seems we make quite the team, human," Jack chuckled. "I guess we do. But we're not out of the woods yet. They'll be back. And next time, we'll have to be ready." Xylurus turned to him, her gaze steady and filled with a new sense of respect. "Next time, we will fight again. But this time, we will fight together. No more running. No more fear." Jack's expression softened, and for a moment, they shared a quiet understanding. They weren't just two different species anymore. They were allies, comrades in a fight for something greater than themselves. "We're ready," Jack said, his voice calm but confident. "Let's make sure we win this war." As the transport continued to glide through the asteroid field, with the rebel ships fading in the distance, both Jack and Xylurus knew this was just the beginning. Their fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, they felt ready for whatever came next. The transport drifted through the vast expanse of space, its engines humming quietly as it made its way toward the neutral space station that would serve as their temporary refuge. The battle with the rebel fleet was behind them, but the feeling of victory was still fresh. Jack and Xylurus sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Though their connection had deepened over the past few hours, Xylurus stood by the viewport, her eyes gazing out into the infinite darkness of space. The stars, so far away, seemed like tiny pinpricks of light, distant and cold. Yet in that moment, they held a sense of promise. She had been at the center of so many battles, surrounded by endless conflict. But now, for the first time, she felt as if something had changed. She had fought for survival, not just as a queen, but as a person, as an individual. And beside her, there was Jack, an unlikely companion, a human soldier who had risked everything to protect her. Someone who had proven that strength didn't come from the power of a species, but from the heart. From the will to fight when everything seemed lost, Jack leaned back in the pilot's seat, his hands still lightly resting on the controls. He had always been a soldier, someone used to following orders, to doing what was needed in times of danger. But something about this mission, this alliance, felt different. He had come to protect the Queen, but in the process, he had found something more important to cause. A connection. It wasn't just about keeping her safe anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. "Almost there," Jack said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of anticipation in it. The neutral station was in sight, and soon they would be safe, at least for a while. Xylurus turned toward him, her golden eyes searching his face. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "And more than that, I owe you my trust." Jack gave her a small smile. "I was just doing my job, but it means a lot to me that you say that." For a moment, the Queen seemed to hesitate. "You've taught me something, Jack, about humanity, about strength." She looked down at the floor, her expression thoughtful. "I never truly understood humans before. I thought you were just another species, fighting for survival. But now, I see that there is something more, something deeper." Jack's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Xylurus met his gaze, her expression serious. "I've spent my life thinking that strength was only about power, about control. But you fight for others, even when it's hard, even when the odds are against you. That is something I now see in humanity. It's a strength that goes beyond what I understood." Jack nodded slowly. "It's not always about power. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing, even when it's tough, and standing by the people who need you." Xylurus gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than I realized." As the transport approached the station, the silence between them was comfortable. They both knew that their journey wasn't over. They had made it this far, but the path ahead was still uncertain. The rebel forces would not give up easily. The peace talks were still on hold, and the future of the galaxy rested in the balance. The transport docked at the station, and the doors hissed open, revealing a sleek, modern interior. The station was a neutral ground, a place where delegates from all species could come together to negotiate, to form alliances, and to seek peace. But for Jack and Xylurus, it was a temporary haven, a place to regroup, to heal, and to prepare for what was to come. As they stepped off the transport, a group of station personnel greeted them, offering assistance and guidance. But Xylurus, despite the fatigue in her body, stood tall. She was the queen, after all, and though she had learned much from Jack, she would not forget who she was. "Thank you for your help," Xylurus said, turning to Jack as they walked through the station's halls. "But now, we must focus on what comes next." Jack nodded. "Agreed. The rebels won't stop. But we'll be ready." Xylurus glanced at him, a glint of determination in her eyes. "I think we've both learned that we're stronger together than we are apart. The galaxy may see us as different, but I no longer believe that the differences matter as much as the things we have in common. We both fight for the same cause." Peace. Jack smiled. "Yeah, and we'll fight for it together." They arrived at the station's central meeting room, where representatives from various species were already gathering. The room was large, with holographic displays and tables set up for discussions. It was a place for diplomacy, but the air was thick with tension. The peace talks had already been delayed once, and many delegates were beginning to question whether they could ever truly trust one another. Xylurus walked to the center of the room, her posture commanding. The representatives fell silent as she entered. The queen's presence was undeniable. She had been a symbol of strength for her people, but now her role was different. She was no longer just a ruler. She was a leader who had learned the value of alliances, of trust, and of cooperation. Jack stood at the back of the room, watching her. He was just a soldier, but in that moment, he felt proud. Proud to be standing beside someone like Xylurus, someone who had grown, who had learned, and who was ready to lead her people toward a new future. Xylurus turned to face the assembly, her voice clear and confident. "The time for war is over," she said. "We have fought for too long. The lives lost, the resources wasted, they cannot be regained. But we can change our future, together." Her words echoed in the room, and for the first time, the delegates seemed to listen. The tension that had filled the air began to fade, replaced by a sense of possibility. Xylurus' strength was no longer just about her power. It was about her ability to bring others together, to lead with courage and compassion. As she finished speaking, the room remained silent for a moment. Then, one by one, the representatives began to speak. They spoke of compromise, of unity, and of the possibility of peace. It was a slow process, but it was a start. And that start was enough. Jack stepped forward, his voice quiet but strong. "We may be different species, but we all want the same thing, peace. And we'll fight for it, no matter what it takes." The room fell silent again, but this time, there was no fear, no doubt, only the quiet understanding that something had changed. And that change, for the first time in a long time, was something worth fighting for. As the discussions continued, Jack stood beside Xylurus, watching as she took her place at the table. She was a queen, yes, but she was also something more now. She was a leader who had learned to trust, to listen, and to fight for peace. And Jack, he was a soldier, someone who had fought alongside the queen. But now, he too was something more. He was part of something greater than himself. A new alliance, a new beginning. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and the road to peace would not be easy. But with each step forward, they were moving closer to a future where differences didn't divide them, but united them. And with that hope, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead together.